I was 6 when the big black car rolled up. I still remember my mother screaming as they pulled me away from her. They told her I was going to a better place, a school where I'd learn new things. They promised she could visit. They swore it was for the best. They lied. I didn't see my mother again for 5 years. By the time I finally returned, the little girl she'd said goodbye to was gone. I didn't even know how to speak her language anymore. I was one of the lucky ones. I came home. Thousands of others never did. Section 1. The system of genocide. For more than 100 years, this was the reality for Indigenous families all across Canada. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate, state-sponsored system designed for one single purpose. In 2015, after hearing testimony from over 6,000 survivors, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission gave it a name: cultural genocide. Starting in the 1880s and running until the late 1990s, the Canadian government and Christian churches worked together to tear Indigenous children from their homes. More than 150,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children, some as young as 3 or 4, were forced into one of over 130 institutions known as residential schools. The very last one didn't shut its doors until 1997. And the men who designed this system? They were perfectly clear about their goal. Duncan Campbell Scott, a high-ranking official in Indian affairs, said in 1920 that he wanted to get rid of the Indian problem. His plan was to continue until there was not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed. The strategy was as simple as it was brutal: kill the Indian in the child. So how do you do that? You have to sever a child from everything that makes them who they are: their family, their land, their language, and their spirit. The schools were intentionally built far from their home communities, making it almost impossible for parents to visit or for children to run away. In 1920, a change to the Indian Act made attending these schools mandatory. Government agents and police were sent to reserves to round up children, often using force against families who tried to resist. This wasn't education. It was the systematic destruction of cultures and the targeted dismantling of families, all in the name of assimilation. Section 2. The nightmare within the walls. The second a child walked through the school's doors, the process of erasure began. Their traditional clothes were taken and sometimes burned. They cut their hair, which for many Indigenous nations holds deep cultural and spiritual significance. Their names were often replaced with a number, stripping them of their most basic identity. But the most critical rule was the language. Children were brutally punished for speaking the only language they'd ever known. This created a profound sense of shame and isolation, and it worked. Within a generation, the linguistic chain that had passed down knowledge, stories, and identity for thousands of years was shattered. The schools themselves were chronically underfunded, overcrowded, and dangerously unsanitary. Children were malnourished and sometimes used as subjects in nutritional experiments without consent. Disease was rampant. Tuberculosis and influenza tore through the schools, and the death rates were staggering. In some schools, especially in the early 20th century, the death rate climbed as high as 60%. The children who died were almost never sent home. To save money, they were buried in unmarked graves on or near school grounds, and their families were often never even told what happened. Beyond the neglect, there was horrific abuse. Survivors have shared countless stories of physical, emotional, and sexual violence from the very staff and clergy who were supposed to be their caregivers. The system wasn't just designed to neglect. It was designed to actively break the spirits of these children, leaving a legacy of pain that didn't end when they left. You've probably seen the headlines in the last few years about the discovery of unmarked graves at former residential school sites, like the 215 found in Kamloops in 2021, or the 751 at Marival. As of 2025, searches across the country continue to confirm more suspected grave sites. But for Indigenous communities, this isn't a discovery. It's a painful confirmation of the stories that elders and survivors have been telling for decades, stories that for so long Canada refused to hear. Section 3. The Echo of Trauma. The residential school system didn't just disappear when the last school closed. It created a wound so deep that it has been passed down from one generation to the next. a phenomenon known as intergenerational trauma. Think about it. A whole generation of children grew up without love or a healthy family life. They were raised in an environment of fear and abuse, where they were taught to be ashamed of who they were. How could you learn to be a loving parent when you were never parented yourself? When these survivors had their own children, many carried that unresolved trauma with them. The pain came out in higher rates of depression, anxiety, addiction, and suicide in their communities. This trauma becomes a cycle. The children of survivors often grow up in homes affected by these struggles, and they, in turn, inherit the same emotional and psychological burdens. Research confirms that the children and grandchildren of survivors are more likely to face challenges in school, struggle with mental health, and feel disconnected from their culture. This isn't a historical artifact. It's a public health crisis happening right now. The injustices Indigenous peoples face in Canada today, from overrepresentation in the child welfare system to shocking gaps in health and education, are a direct echo of a system designed to destroy them. This trauma is the ongoing legacy of Canada's crime. Section 4, the resistance and resilience. But this is not just a story of victimhood. It is also a story of incredible strength, resistance, and resilience. For decades, survivors fought to have their voices heard, breaking the silence that was forced upon them. Their courage is what led to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, which finally documented the horrific truth of this system for all of Canada to see. Out of that truth, a powerful movement was born. Every child matters. That phrase has become a rallying cry for justice, remembrance, and healing. You see it most on Orange Shirt Day, held every September 30th. It's inspired by the story of survivor Phyllis Webstad, who had her brand new orange shirt, a gift from her grandmother, taken from her on her first day at a residential school. Today, wearing orange is a promise to honor the children who never came home and the survivors who carry that history. The Every Child Matters movement is about confronting the past while demanding a better future. It's about Indigenous communities reclaiming their languages, revitalizing their ceremonies, and leading their own healing. It's about the profound strength of peoples who, after more than a century of a system trying to erase them, are not only still here, but are fighting to ensure that every child finally gets the chance to grow up rooted in their own culture and identity. Conclusion. The history of residential schools isn't just Indigenous history, it's Canadian history. And the work of reconciliation isn't just for Indigenous peoples, it is everyone's responsibility. The end of this video is not the end of this story. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission released 94 calls to action, concrete steps that governments, institutions, and all of us can take to address this legacy. A decade later, as of 2025, progress has been painfully slow. Only a small fraction of the calls have been fully completed. So what can you do? First, educate yourself. Go and read the 94 calls to action. Understand what is actually being asked. Second, listen to and amplify Indigenous voices. Seek out the books, films, and podcasts made by Indigenous creators who are telling their own stories. Third, support the Indigenous-led organizations working on the front lines of healing, language revitalization, and community empowerment. This isn't about guilt. It's about responsibility. It's about facing a history that was designed to be hidden and taking real steps to build a more just future. For over a century, Canada's actions said that some children didn't matter. Now, we have a collective obligation to prove that every single child truly does. If this video opened your eyes, don't just close them again. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that need to be told. Drop a comment below. What is one action you will take after watching this? Will you read the 94 calls to action? Will you support an Indigenous-led organization? Will you share this video with someone who needs to see it? Your engagement pushes this video to more people who need to hear these voices. And if you found this valuable, check out our playlist on Untold Histories that shaped our world. Every view, every share, every conversation matters. Let's make sure every child truly does matter. Thank you for watching.